Say your name and title.
Terry Yates. I'm the Infrastructure and Network Manager in Cary, North Carolina.
So talk a little bit about the smart city vision in Cary, and starting with our vision in Cary.
Right. So our vision in Cary is to basically look at smart city technologies and see basically how we connect the right data at the right time to the right people, and also to further economic development, and also create that workforce in the future that will support smart cities technologies.
And how important is the network to providing smart city services?
The networks. I think one thing one important thing is that with smart cities deployments, there are going to be a variety of networks, and I think those are going to be the foundations for smart city technology. I think that two fundamentals that are tied to the network are being able to see data in a live format, and then making actionable changes with that data. And that communication network is going to be fundamentally important for that.
So what are some of the projects that you've undertaken, and what have been the results?
So one of our big successful programs around smart cities is our simulated smart city campus. And what we're doing there is we're imagine the town hall campus that includes two park community centers. It incorporates our 911 center, our traffic management center, our IT data center, our parking deck, and several other parking areas. We're using that as a simulated smart city so we can test out different smart cities technologies. Several being parking. We're installing sensors for parking. We are looking at facility usage through Wi-Fi beacons, and we're trying to use the data from that to better engage with our citizens.
Can you talk a little bit more about the beacons?
So with the Wi-Fi beacons, basically we have deployed Wi-Fi across our town hall campus. Our Parks and Rec department is very interested in how their community centers are being utilized. So what we're doing with that is we take Wi-Fi beacon information where we're basically just collecting the number of devices in a facility at any point in time, and then we're creating heat maps that basically show in the area of the buildings, how are people engaging in the programs? Are they using our gym more than our meeting rooms? And then taking that information and, like I said, determining, should we put a kiosk up to better provide citizen services? And the great thing about it is, we always keep that privacy in the back of our privacy concerns in mind with that, so we're not collecting any personal information or anything as patrons of our facilities.
So did that require public-private partnerships, or have you had any public-private partnerships to help build the smart city initiative?
So the great thing about this is it actually created I would say public-private collaboration where, because we're testing out these technologies on our campus, it's a very small area. So corporations can actually come in, install the equipment, and they can test out their solutions and show us that they actually work before we deploy them on a full scale. And so, and there's no really cost to the town as part of that. So that is really the benefit of that. And then another thing about our simulated smart city campus is that startups can come and test technologies on our campus. They may not have a location where they can showcase their technology. It gives them the ability to showcase that technology. And then third, from an education standpoint, we have college interns from UNC, Duke, NC State, Wake Tech that can actually work on our campus environment, and they can work with these technologies. And so eventually we would like to create a program where they get college credit as part of that.
Does the university as a whole, do they help you? Like Georgia Tech helps process data. Are the universities getting on board?
Yeah, so we're working with NC State. Over the summer, I had an intern from Duke University that was really focused on the data side, the data analytics, how to interconnect various platforms together, taking our parking data, taking the facility usage data, and merging it.
Okay, so how about 5G? Is that something that you're looking forward to? Is that, do you think that's going to help provide more service?
I do. I think, as I was saying, I think that in order for cities to become smarter, it's going to be a variety of networks, from 5G to private frequencies to all types of wireless services. I think Wi-Fi, LoRa. I think all of these types of networks are going to complement each other and work together to create smarter solutions for cities and governments.
Okay, so overall, when you sit with the mayor, what do you talk about as the goals for the program?
So, I would sum it up as, again, it's about having the right data, connecting the right data with the right people at the right time.
Let's see if we work. Okay, no worries. That was actually the guidance. I had a question on the sound.
Gotcha. Gotcha.
Any other thoughts on the program and what's most crucial and how you're helping to build the future, if you would?
Yeah, I would say the most crucial thing, and that has been resonated at this conference, is really to focus on the problems that your citizens have as we work for our citizens, and I think if we focus on the problems that they have and trying to create solutions to solve those problems is really the most important thing. All right.
We got a great response to 2017 and started, connect them with utilities, connect them with other stakeholders, get them down. Some of the challenges and successes, lessons learned, and maybe a bit of a teaser about where your city might be going next.
I think already we're a smart city because we were smart enough to grab the very last slot for our presentation and maybe learn from what these other folks had done. Probably the biggest thing we're able to do with the Smart Cities Award is we leveraged it immediately into a grant. And I kind of think the Smart Cities grants are going to be rare, and that goes right to the funding issue. But we were very, very fortunate to apply to the Knight Foundation almost as soon as we won. And we got a very nice grant from the Knight Foundation. And what we decided to do is kind of take a step back, and we used the grant money from the Knight Foundation, and we're bringing a consultant on board. And the purpose of the consultant is actually to address many of the issues that we've talked about throughout the conference. We want to talk about, what is smart cities for the city of Philadelphia. The city of Philadelphia is probably not much different than any other big city. We call ourselves a city of neighborhoods. And I often say this, if you were in the poorer sections of the city or where you might have a lot of crime, their idea of what a smart city is very, very different from maybe the more affluent areas. For example, the poorer people, they would tell you they want surveillance cameras. That's what they want in their neighborhoods. There's no doubt about it. They think it cuts down on the violence. The rich people, they want parking. They want to be able to park. They don't have crime. They want to stick their car somewhere. That's kind of what they want. So the idea of hiring the consultant is to kind of look across the broad spectrum of what's best for the city, where do we put our dollars, and the most important thing is where do we get the dollars. Our biggest concern is, we have a lot of momentum going now, and we're going to end up with a real nice plan, we think, at the end of this. But I'm very concerned about how we're going to get funded. And we're probably going to have to do some of the PPP, the public-private partnerships, which we think are a very good source of funding for us. But they in themselves, as you probably know, there are problems with that too that we got to be concerned about. So that's kind of where we're going now. And as Stuart said, our Smart City Conference is 8 days from now. We have tons of people that want to come. We'll probably be turning people away. And we hope to have our plan done by the end of the year and be able to move forward, hopefully. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much. Kevin?
So Stuart, as you know, our was primarily about sustainability and resilience. And we had a workshop on the 25th anniversary of Hurricane Andrew. At that, we've been working, and I've been working with Esri and some of their partners on some sea level rise initiatives, modeling 3D and coming out with an application a few months ago that's capable of showing what levels of sea level rise and or storm surge could have upon the city. Well, a couple of weeks ago, we got to experience that firsthand, unfortunately, with Hurricane Irma. So we put that application into play, and also in the 60 hours I was in the Emergency Operations Center, we put out about 5 or 6 applications using our GIS software that gave our first responders and other personnel, operational personnel in the city, the capability to start collecting data as soon as it was safe to go out after the storm. And we also were using a lot of the sensors we have throughout the city for wind and things of that nature to determine when it was safe to continue to dispatch from 911 or to stop. And so we could see different parts of the city where we could continue dispatching or not. And obviously we need a lot more work in that area, and that's kind of one of our main focuses in Smart Cities initially.
Great, great. Well, thank you for being here, given all you've been doing conference, and you skipped out for a day to be here.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Ken?
Great, yes. So the city of Indianapolis has been going through, over the last 4 years I've been there, kind of a evolution in terms of what smart cities means to us and what that looks like for Indianapolis. We talk a lot about, when we talk about technology initiatives and we talk about taking on new technology initiatives, we always have a focus on it being very organically Indy. Something that is specific to Indianapolis, our challenges, our features, the things that we offer that are different from other localities, and how do we utilize these kinds of opportunities to discuss those things and move forward. And so when I got to the city 2 years ago, there was a different mayor in place, and we had some one-off projects that were interesting, that generated some interesting data, that were improving citizens' lives in some way, metered parking privatization that allowed us to put a sensor below every single parking spot in downtown Indianapolis, allowing them to utilize an app that tells them where there's open parking on a Saturday night or a Friday night, so we don't have people, going around the block, putting more pollution into the air when they don't need to. We have an electric car sharing program that was implemented that generated a lot of data to help us build a plan around mass transit and some mass transit changes that are being made in the city. It's really important to the city and to the mayor, the current mayor and the prior mayor both, that we build an improved transit system in Indianapolis. And in a city that is known for the largest car race in the world, that is, people love their cars. It's not easy to get people to take mass transit or to even use car sharing. And so we've been using that data to kind of iterate and understand. And so by the time we applied for the Smart Cities Readiness Challenge and got notification of the grant, we were really seeing kind of a disjointed approach for us across all the different agencies and departments that we serve. We're a consolidated city and county government, and so we have both all the county elected officials, the legislative branch, of course, the judicial branch, and then the city departments, and lots of chiefs and lots of bosses in that scenario, which makes my job very fun and constantly challenging. And so we use this opportunity to start building a roadmap, which is the result of the grant. And so I think some of the most exciting parts of the last year have been engaging with new partners who we really weren't engaging with before. We've had sold off municipal utilities over the years. Those were privatized, and that disjointed those connections. They're generating a ton of data about our citizens that's really useful to us, and we weren't really getting access to that. There's an interest in these Code for America brigades, and how do we connect the dots with them. And then there's tons of data that's just of interest to universities locally and nationally, both, and how do we utilize their interest to actually further something for our citizens. At the end of the day, for us and where we are is Smart Cities has to hit 3 mayoral priorities. If it doesn't hit those 3 priorities, we don't invest in it. And so for us, that's fiscal solvency, still addressing some fiscal issues for the city of Indianapolis and trying to get to a balanced budget, which 2018 will be our first year in many years. We'll have that. Public safety, improving public safety, either the perception of or the actual public safety. Those are 2 really different things, but it has to hit somewhere in that as well for us. And then reduction in poverty. Poverty drives public safety, the fiscal solvency, and all the others. If we don't address poverty in some way, then it ultimately doesn't get us where we need to be. And so our challenge and a number of those challenges together were really a part of what we laid out and looking at. And I think we're excited to get our roadmap. We've already gone. Charlie, it was a good move. I think I would have loved to learn from the others too. That was smart to go last. I think I've told you that more than once. But I do think that getting the kind of people we did in a room together and learning from them and what their interest from the nonprofit side and some of these other service providers is going to provide us with a roadmap that helps us understand where we're going and how we link that to our priorities as well.
Great, thank you. Ted?
So Stuart, in Austin, I think what I'd like to do is describe the structure of our government there a little bit. 2 seminal events that have pushed smartness and some predictions of where it's going. First, an understanding of smartness, I'll just say that if something's collecting data, storing data, or analyzing data, if that project or program has that kind of operation, a serious collection of data, then you might say it has an opportunity to be smart. That's sort of the operating way to talk about it. In the city of Austin, we have, the structure is kind of important. We have what we call it's called a weak mayor system. The mayor is sort of a chairman of the board. He's not the CEO of the city. He doesn't direct operations. He sets policy. And what's happened after, and then we have the operational piece. In this, I'll talk about the seminal events. The 2 seminal events is that Austin applied for the U.S. Department of Transportation Smart Cities grant. We didn't win. Some city in Ohio won that. But we came in second, or we can say we came in second. But there was a very, it was a focusing event. It brought in a number of departments: energy, transportation, the mayor, our executive staff, and it made smartness real to a lot of people inside the government, as well as a little bit outside the community. And smartness became something important to the policymakers and the executives rather than this abstract buzzword they keep hearing about. The other event was the Smart City Challenge Grant, and that had a different effect. We're not using it the way we thought, and the effect was different than I think we had anticipated. The effect was on the community, because we went in with the community to apply for the grant. We won the grant, and the community celebrated. It was really a big event, much bigger for the community than it was internally. It was, for some folks internally, it was another burden, a thing we have to do, right? And so what we also learned in that process is that it was better for our community to be the leader in using or taking advantage of the grant offerings. For one reason, it turns out, we didn't know this when we applied, that the City Council has to approve any acceptance of any offering of $25,000 or more. We didn't know that going in. We found it after we got the grant, and that just caused a lot of problems. So we said, hey, give it to the community. So those 2 events it was like a cheerleading event for the city in some respects. And what's happened is our City Council and our mayor have strategic plans. We have an internal governing board we created beneath the City Council operational that is looking at smartness. But there's no centralized, authoritative way of saying, this is what we're going to do. It's very distributed. And what I think is going to happen in the future is that transportation is trying something smart, energy is trying something smart, and when you hear about Austin, something smart happening, it's going to be little pockets of, I'll call them explosions of smartness, and they may be different types of smartness. Austin Water thinks being smart is if they can wirelessly read their water meters, where Austin Energy is talking about controlling the equipment when they're talking about smartness. Lastly, I want to talk about we're experimenting with private-public partnerships, and we're doing that and on small number of dollars. The private sector is donating, or not donating, it's committing funds. We want to iterate that, be successful, learn from that, and then eventually the goal for some of us is to go for a big private partnership in the millions of dollars. The reason for that is that the procurement piece, this is also a part of smartness, is an important piece. We want to have quick decisions so the private sector gets a decision quickly and realizes its risk profile. And they, but they have to put some funds up front. And so they get a quicker decision, they get more action, they don't have to wait a year and a half for a purchasing decision. In exchange, they have to, assume some of the risk and maybe invest some of the money. Like I said, I don't know where we're going to go from here. I don't know what exactly is going to happen, but we're going to have little explosions of smartness because of the structure we have now.
Great, thank you. Charles?
Thank you, Stuart. Orlando, we actually started doing things that could be considered smart back over 2 decades ago. We had some challenges with mobility for tourists, and out of that, we engaged some stakeholders, key stakeholders, including General Motors, a rental car company, AAA, an insurance company, research universities, and so on, and US DOT. Out of that, we got in-vehicle navigation systems. And we've had that similar innovative spirit in various departments in the city, not all the departments, but definitely was not coordinated. And then in 2007, our mayor decided that we needed to have a sustainability plan, GreenWorks Orlando. Chris Castro, the sustainability director, is here. He's an Energizer bunny. Got lots of energy, and some of you heard him this morning. But that was the beginning of our smart city process in earnest, very focused, but still a little bit limited. And then in 2012, as a region, Central Florida came together looking at how shall we grow for the next 30 to 50 years. Surprisingly, the very next year, at the federal level, Secretary Fox, 2014, then 2015, started a national campaign going around the country looking at beyond traffic or beyond 2045, out of which the US DOT's challenge came. Again, we're resentful also of Columbus, but I'm just kidding. They inspired us. And we had about 40 partners on our team for that application. And at the end of that process, we all got together at a place called Epcot, 40 different partners. The experimental prototype community of tomorrow was what Walt Disney envisioned as a smart city way back. And we all committed that as partners and stakeholders in Central Florida, we were going to pursue smart city branding and becoming a smart city in earnest. Following that, we have gone after grants. Subsets of that 40-member group have gone after grants and different challenges, and just looking, without going after grants, at how we can make the Orlando area smarter. And then the group decided that we should go after your challenge, which we were proud to be winner amongst these wonderful folks. And the US DOT had another challenge, automated vehicle proving grounds. And we decided we're going to win that one. We're going to learn from everything Columbus did and look at every other winner of everything, and we were winner of that. And it was a diverse group of stakeholders looking at everybody's interests in the community. So we're right now developing a comprehensive program. Rosa, our CIO, is here. She formalized our open data policy last year. And then we have 3 preliminary areas of focus, strong areas of focus: public safety, the built environment, and transportation. Of course, transportation, because we rent more cars in Orlando than anywhere else in the world. And we're the largest tourist market. Our biggest challenge right now is that ICT, information communications technology, is the foundation of a smart city. And we need to have a redundant, robust program. Lessons learned, we've got to engage with our stakeholders. I'll tell you a quick story. Rick Howard, Public Works Director, and I we had under our portfolios the parking system for Orlando. And we wanted to have smart parking, which would include notifying parkers that their time was running out on meters. And there was a big fight at City Hall. People were saying, you know, we're going to lose huge amounts of revenue if we do that. Business community that we engaged gave us cover. And what's happened since then, Stuart, is that yes, people get notifications and can top up their meters, but people now know where the parking is, and it's more convenient to do business, and we're making more money than we made before with the parking fines having gone down. So it's a paradigm shift, and it's a really smart thing that we're proud of. A lot more, but we're running out of time, so I'll come back.
Thank you, Charles. Thanks, all of you. Fantastic stories.
Over again, expect the outcome to be different. Well, we've been buying software the same way for the last 40 years. And a lot of those projects, and you know how it works, right? The bigger the project, the more likelihood it is to either go way over budget or fail. Matter of fact, in municipal government, you'll see the stats. As the projects get pretty large, half don't make it, maybe more. Sometimes some studies have said up to 70% don't make it. And I think part of this goes back to how we buy, how we procure this. Tell me if this sounds familiar. I'm sure there are vendors in the room, right? If you're a vendor or company, I'm sorry, company, raise your hand, okay? Tell me if this sounds familiar, right? Is government wants to start a big project, right? Well, what do we do on the government side, right? We start gathering requirements, right? And we probably hire a company because we can't do it ourselves, so we're gathering all these requirements, right? And we wrap them up in a big fat RFP. This guy's shaking his head. You've seen him, right? We put this big fat RFP out there, right? And then you on your side, you probably have teams of people that look through these, and your first thing is, why did they put all these damn stupid requirements in here? How can I meet these, right? So for us, for a big city, right, we'll put out an RFP. It will have 600 to well over 1,000 requirements. And what do we issue to do, right? Now, if we're good, we'll put them all in a matrix at the end, right? And we'll say, here's the requirement, software must do this, it must do this, it must do this, and you have comply, not comply, and then you have the little exception thing over there, which you have to explain why it won't make it, right? So you have teams of people that are answering this, right? Now, on our side, and I'm sure you know this, we put out a big RFP, we might get a dozen responses, maybe more, maybe 15 responses, and they're all books like this. Right? We have an evaluation committee, okay? The evaluation committee, those people will have full-time jobs. Now they're expected to read all those books. And they're supposed to understand what's in all those books. And they're supposed to keep them straight, what's in all those books. But you kind of know, they're not really reading those books, right? They're not reading books. So what we decided to do is kind of make the process more like what really happens in real life. We're not issuing RFPs up front anymore. For even the biggest project, we're issuing RFIs. And right now, I have 3 out there, maybe 4 out there. I have 4 RFIs out there for software. And what it's going to do is point me to the software. I have 5 software resellers on contract in the city of Philadelphia. How do you get on contract? You agree to the terms and conditions. I'm going to put, and when we identify the software, what I will do is I'll send I'll put it up to the software resellers and say, tell me what it's going to cost. Go out and get it for me, right? What am I really doing, right? I'm pushing my users to COTS solutions. What has gotten us in so much trouble over the years is those 600,000 requirements, they're pushing people to a customized solution which you can't have, which you can't do. And the customized solutions, and we have a ton of them in the city of Philadelphia, we can't upgrade them. We're stuck. We're stuck in a time warp here with some of this stuff. I have one system over police I've been trying to upgrade for 2 years. It has so much custom code in it. It's a one-off. And we're trying to get away from that. So we are going to identify software products using an RFI, and then we're going to use an RFP to implement that software. What's the RFP going to have in it? It's going to be a much different RFP than you're used to seeing. It's going to say, we want you to implement this software. Here's the training requirements. Here's the interface requirements. And it'll be some other gobbledygook in here that the city lawyers put in, right? But pretty much, that's going to be it. Now, I have 3 of these out there, maybe 4 out there now. We haven't gotten through the process. But right now, a mid to high level difficult project from start of RFP to contract signing is 18 to 25 months, right? 18 months to over 2 years. And then after that, you have 18 months to 24 months to implement the project. We think we can cut at least a third off the time by doing this and by forcing our users into COTS products as much as possible. Because we're all going there, guys. You can see the big guys, Microsoft, SAP, Oracle, they're all going to the cloud. They want you to use cloud software, and you can't have 25 versions of the software. They're not going to support them. They're only going to support one. So we might as well get used to going to COTS, because that's where we're all going to go. So if you're a company out there and you think I'm crazy, you can tell me afterwards, say, this is a crazy idea. I won't be offended. I've been told I'm crazy before. So you're happy to tell me, but I'm looking for, I have run this by a number of our vendors, and they feel it will be easier on their end as well as easier on our end, especially if I can push people into COTS solutions, which is what I'm trying to do.
Does anyone else want to tackle this one? Ted.
In what Charles just described, the document, the specs, just the startups don't have the staff to look at that. Yet we want the startups to participate in city business. So we're trying to identify a process. This is in our technology management office, and identify projects that may take 2 pages for a startup to figure out, and we'll target companies of a certain size. We have to get this through legal and a few other reviews. The idea is we want to identify projects and paperwork that's low overhead and is approved by an outside entity. So if it's not a city approval that decides on who wins the project, who gets to implement the project, but if we have a community organization that selects it, at least in the state of Texas, there's ways we can get around some of the requirements. The problem with some of the hurdles we're having is that our procurement office doesn't like this idea. They want you to go through procurement, and the cities are fiefdoms in some respects, and Austin has its own share. The other thing that we're looking at, and I mentioned it in the introductory comments, is private-public partnerships. And the nice thing about this is this week we're starting one in transportation, where we're looking at DSRC, digital short-range communication technology on automobiles and buses, that kind of thing, the infrastructure, where the city, where the funding for this is under $100,000 being provided by the private sector. The city gets a chance to learn what this technology is, just understands how to even collect it. And if this is successful, we would like to iterate on this and create another 50 to 100K private-public partnership. Get some experience doing that, and then we're going to go for the larger ones, as I mentioned in introduction. The things we want to learn and we want to get comfort on is that nothing really bad happens out of these things. This idea of the private sector assuming risk and investing in a city, maybe getting a return on the investment after 10 years, it's out there. Cities are doing this, but it's new to Austin. But the idea here is that the funds come in quicker, the projects start quicker, we get to iterate on it in ways that we not necessarily can iterate on in the old ways, and we don't have these huge documents saying here's 1,000 requirements. We kind of learn what the requirements are going forward.
Great.
I would just echo, I think both Ted and Charlie are hitting on something that's really important, and it seems like oftentimes government officials are scared to talk about this topic a little bit, right? And so I love when Charlie just goes at it for what it is. I appreciate that. I do think that the way Philadelphia is going about it is smart, and I think it's exciting. And I think the key there for the other government officials in the room is that there are ways to get in with this new technology utilizing some of these larger competed contracts you have. And you shouldn't be afraid to kind of go after those things. There's also, from a startup community perspective, as technologists, we're all interested in stoking that fire a little bit and getting involved. And sometimes it's really difficult to make your way in, especially to government work, if that's the case. And so sharing stories amongst each other and things like that are the key to how that's going to happen, I think. There's some exciting work being done in the startup world to come up with some concepts. New York piloted an idea, and now it's a separate startup called Marketplace.City. and is trying to get off the ground the idea that you can, in an Amazon-style approach, see these technologies, understand who's using them in other cities, and even rate them yourself, right? So it's kind of a government community and working together to develop those things. I think we all have to be open and willing to play a part in that. Otherwise, those things won't happen, right? We are all kind of required to rethink this. And yeah, the procurement office, we make them a little nervous as well. But I think that as long as it's all within the letter of the law and we can get it done, I think this is time to be more innovative in our approach, which is exciting. Charles?
The beauty of this is that we have great exchange going on, even away from here. We've got to know each other, even folks who are not winners. And I love what Charlie had to say. And we have one wrinkle that many people are looking at, is then going the next step and maybe procuring a service instead. So defining what you need, what are you trying to achieve, and then sharing the risk. So smaller and mid-sized cities don't want to take the risk of, acquiring, big things. They need to look at the service instead. They want to stay agile, and they want to make sure there's a big corporate partner who's really committed and is willing to share the risk.
Thank you. And it reminds me that one of the unexpected things about this whole process is that we've got a cohort of cities now, and in a very natural way, a variety of leaders from the various cities have been reaching out to each other, not just the 5 people on the stage, but many people, associated with each applicant. And that's been fun to watch, because the council doesn't know everything. We're trying to convene and connect you to some world-class thought leaders, connect you to each other, and be on a learning journey together. So it's been inspiring to watch how all of you have been learning from each other and from other cities around the world. And as we go into 2018, we'll get a whole other cohort, and we'll continue then connecting this first group to future winners. I'd like to open the floor to any questions. We have time for 2 or 3 questions. Please step up to the mic.
A comment, then a question, maybe augmenting what the panel has said. So at the City of Orlando, we all agree, as well as everyone in the panel, that the RFP process is not flexible enough to address technology, especially for large-scale projects. So in the past few years, we did go the RFI path, and then from there implemented all sole sourced. The last year, we did something a little bit even more different. We issued what the state of Florida approves as an invitation to negotiate. And we didn't do it in a small scale. So we issued our first...
We have some of that in place today, but not in the technology area. So we do have to expand it to the technology area because, as everybody has said here, our goal is to implement projects in a shorter period of time than, make them 2 or 3 year projects, because they just don't seem to work in that amount of time.
In Orlando's case, we actually have several approaching us right now to enter into those partnerships. But we've decided in the last couple of weeks that we need to step back just a tad, and we want to do a few things. We want to have a city council workshop to educate our city council about, the possibilities. We want to develop a formal policy and put it in the city code, and have a comprehensive plan that looks out to the future for where we're going, and put stuff in our CIP, our capital improvements program. Once we get that done within the next 4 to 6 months, then we'll be better able to engage the community and go through those discussions.
We've been thinking a lot about this, how we go about this. And the problem is really a fundamental one, right? You have to make money on your side. I don't have to make any money. If you could do something for me that benefits the citizens, I'm okay to come out even, but you have to make money. So in a smart city project, how can you make money off of me, right? And we've only thought of a couple different ways, right? One is advertising. 2 is to monetize the data. And I saw another one here today, was with lighting, one of the cities, I think it was San Diego. They kind of funded it by savings on lightings, which sounds great, but you're really in a big city, they don't look at cost savings as real savings because they're still going to put money up. So one of the things we're really looking for is how do you make money and I break even and it does some civic good? How do we do that? Advertising and monetizing the data, what other ways are out there for us? If you could tell me, that would be a great help.
Stuart, I'd like to follow up on Charles. That's a very good point. That vendors, when they're coming in for these types of things, many times with around data, they talk about wanting to advertise, and that's how they're going to make money. We are trying to figure out ways that we don't have to default to advertising for the cities, for vendors to make money off of the project. But sometimes with a lighting solution, you can get a return on energy savings. So, you have to monetize something. But if it's data, how do you monetize that data without throwing up an advertisement? Because various cities, including Austin, have some fairly strict ordinances on that. We are exploring about the idea of monetizing the data in terms of selling the data. Now, there's no decisions on this yet, but how do we monetize the data that might be collected and then have that be something that the vendor can make money off of, as long as it doesn't involve direct advertising on city property or using city assets. But it's the creativity, if it's out there, to how to make the money without putting up the advertisements or reducing costs for the city. That's another way. But that's a key value proposition that vendors should think about when they're coming to the city on a great partnership.
Great, we have time for one last quick question.
Awesome. Thank you.
What's been that key strategic partner that really gave you that extra energy and focus to do well in this challenge?
Let's start.
Charles.
Oh, geez, we've got a few, but key one for us has been the University of Central Florida. We got Metroplan Orlando and quite a few others, but the University of Central Florida is a really good partner that allows us to vet ideas, and they have professors and graduate students who have actually worked in industry who've allowed us to go through these things and narrow down our focus and help us able to pick things that are affordable and sustainable.
Great. So in Austin, I'd say there's two. One, we have a group called City Up. It's a private organization, nonprofit of universities, private sector companies that come together to thinking about what they'd like to do around smartness. But more specifically, as Charles just said, we work with our universities. The universities are a gold mine of being able to do research in this area that the cities just don't have a mission to do. We've brought in Texas State, UT, Texas A&M. We're bringing in SMU from Dallas, all into Austin to work on these projects. They get grant funding. They have a lot of folks interested in doing really interesting work. I recommend highly that you consider bringing in your universities for a partnership.
Great. Ken.
So for the city of Indianapolis, we obviously we're the city and we included the utilities separately: water utility, electric utility, gas utility, and they were a big part of what we were doing, specifically around what our initiatives were. But we also included the local university that is right downtown with us. We are also the state capital of Indiana, so we included the state of Indiana as a part and as a partner through the process. And obviously a number of others, but we included our transportation authority, other municipal corporations within Indianapolis and Marion County.
Great. For Miami, we did this grant mostly internally. You know, our Office of Resilience and IT department, our grants department got together, but through our workshop, we were approached by both the University of Miami and Florida International University, who are local to us, and Miami-Dade. So now we're starting to engage in those partnerships and use those resources at the university to help us transition it into the bigger plan.
Great, good to hear.
We also reached out to the universities, but the one that I think it might be the most fruitful is we reached out to the Chamber of Commerce. And the reason we did that is that's where the money is. You know, universities get grants, but the Chamber of Commerce is business, and if we get business on our side, I think we might be able to fund some of these projects.
Great. Well, thank you so much.
And communicate. These are the real implications that don't just impact your ability to hail a ride, it impacts your ability to succeed in such a competitive environment now where the basic user expectation is on demand, real time, come to me, go to there, save time all the time. And I think we have to allow everybody to be empowered to be able to compete in this environment. We've got a lot of work to do.
Mark, your thoughts?
So I want to brag about Columbus for a second because the mayor identified the issues that he wanted to solve, the problems that he had identified, dealt with equity. So to me, when you sit there and try to figure out what makes a city smart, right? Because smart cities is a rough term, right? It's somewhat of a commercial term, not necessarily a civic term. But when you're a mayor, you try to figure out how do I as a city become smart? I can put the shiny objects out there and show everybody that I'm smart, or actually I can try to do problem identification. So the mayor Ginther identified that in the Linden neighborhood they had babies dying 4 times the national average. And why? Because the OBGYN service providers had abandoned the neighborhood, and therefore the mothers and expecting mothers had to take 2 buses, and the culture developed of not actually getting the medical care that they needed, and so they had the infant mortality issue. And so the mayor then applied the technology and innovation that's out there to the problem. So you take the problem, then the innovation and technology to the problem. And to me, the problem identification within cities are often built around access, displacement, and affordability. And how can mobility play into that space, right? How can mobility be actually one of the solutions instead of one of the blocks to solving those problems? And those are some of those that are identified. But I think cities around the country are trying to use smart cities technology as a tool to try to solve those problems.
I just want to bring up the point that for a long time, the priority for transit agencies have been to provide mobility, connecting job centers to population, but not necessarily through the lens of equity. So what happens along with land use decisions that we've made is that we have areas that are low income, neighborhoods that are low income, neighborhoods that are middle income or high income, and there is a huge gap in between. And so the people who are in those low income areas that are also dependent, transit dependent population, we did a study in the city of Dallas in particular, and we saw that people who are especially living on those neighborhoods, we call it transit-dependent core. We did a study to identify transit-dependent core in the city of Dallas. Those people who are also low-income and transit-dependent are 40% of the entire population. Don't have access to transit, are living in transit deserts, versus the citywide number is about 28%. So the question is, what happens to these people? These people end up, first of all, they don't have physical access to jobs and opportunities. What happens when you don't have physical access is that your chances of getting the job is lower. So your chances of upward mobility, having opportunities to improve your quality of life is lower. Also, it's not only about access to jobs. These people have lower access to healthy food, lower access to high quality education, lower access to healthcare facilities, as mentioned by other panelists. So these people, even if we provide, most of the cities, these days are focusing on affordable housing. Even if we provide affordable housing in these areas, we are just barely giving them the chance to survive, but not really to improve their quality of life, not to have, saving, not to have chances for upward mobility, as I mentioned. These people end up spending a big portion of their income on transportation. Transportation is considered affordable if people spend 15% of income on transportation. Housing is affordable if people spend 30% or lower. We found in Dallas people who spend more than 35% of their income on transportation, much more than housing. And And so what happens, again, is that in longer term, we see these neighborhoods are becoming poorer and poorer due to lack of transportation infrastructure. And the gap between low income and wealthier income neighborhoods is widening over time, and we see the increase in poverty rate and a lower chance of upward mobility that people,
Okay, George, say your name and company.
George Atala, Ernst & Young. Look at you.
Yes, we're going to get you like a
All right, George Atala, Ernst & Young.
Great. George, talk to me about smart cities and why Ernst & Young has focused there.
Sure, happy to do so. So we're going through a dramatic societal change, and this is what cities all around the world are experiencing. And this dramatic change is caused by both a rapid change in technology, but also urbanization, and all of that is changing how we work, how we live, who we interact with, how we buy. And this is dramatic, and this is something that we have not seen in prior civilizations. Now, how to address this is something that we are very interested in addressing and in doing and working with cities on. And the traditional answers no longer work. So the old answer of let's just build more no longer applies, because most cities do not even have the funds to do so. There is no space to put new infrastructure, and if you've been to places like Delhi, like Lagos, like Bangkok, we're just running out of space. And then the final thing is that will we actually need all of that infrastructure, given that we're no longer going shopping at shopping centers, we're looking at driverless cars. So will we actually need all of the roads that we are intending to build over the next 30 years? So this is a dramatic change, and this is something that we have not seen in previous societies and previous cities, because fundamentally how the cities look has not really changed in the last 1,000 years. But now we're looking at a dramatic change in that. So how do you address it? And what are the various aspects of addressing the city of the future? And it's not just, since it's not enough to look at infrastructure or just at technology, we need to also be looking at city governance, at an ability to generate the funds that will allow us to put in those wonderful initiatives that are now being called for. But then again, we talk about data. And how do you guarantee the privacy of the data? What data do you collect? How will data drive decision making in the future? All of these are very pertinent problems that we are now looking at. And where we start, and this is, I think, why we're really excited about our relationship with the Smart Cities Council, because it gives us an ability to actually speak with others, discuss, and look at how we can address these very dramatic problems. I think the part one, where you start, is to really take stock of where each city is. What are your problems? What are you mostly worried about? Is it pollution? Is it congestion? Is it disasters like hurricane and earthquakes? What are you trying to respond to? So with that starting point, what do you have in place to be able to respond to these challenges? So we look at resiliency. How can you bounce back from the shocks that you are expecting? With that in mind, starting with what are the things that matter to you? What are the resiliency challenges that you have? Where do you compare with best practice? What is your ability to generate finances to fund those initiatives? This is the plan going forward. And we've been fortunate to have been involved both on the strategy setting, so what is it that you need to do, but also on a lot of implementation work. And that extends across multiple sectors, whether it's healthcare, education, transportation, putting in new infrastructure, generating new financing, looking at alternative financing models. This is something that we've really covered. I think the one thing that we need to remember, there is no option now but to keep moving forward, because it is changing so quickly. If you're not looking at how you can transform your city to keep up with the changes that are happening, you are going to be left behind.
Great. Okay, so you mentioned a number of areas. Let's say PPPs, does that play, and when you answer, please mention PPPs or public-private partnerships.
No.
What role does PPPs play in building a smart city?
So public-private partnerships are often mentioned as a way to help us generate the funding to put in those new smart initiatives. But a word of caution here, the word public-private partnership is an umbrella term that covers many things. Usually people look at it as an ability to generate funding from the private sector. Now, the dramatic difference with the PPP models of the past and where we are now is that the public-private partnership models of the past were based on an underlying tangible asset. And that asset is being used as a collateral to come up with a structured finance scheme that allows you to use the asset as a collateral against future revenue streams. That model no longer applies, and so in many cases does not apply, and so we have to look at other options to be able to generate private sector funding in order to put in those smart cities initiatives. And those new initiatives or new alternative financial models could be things like social impact bonds. It could be tax incremental funding. So there are a number of ways, or actually very basic sharing of savings, right? So if you implement a smart cities initiative that results in savings for the city of a certain amount, it would make sense that to reimburse the private sector for their capital costs and for running the new system, they would share in the savings. So I think just kind of looking at the old models of public-private partnerships that were very much based on a tangible asset, such as a power plant or a road or a bridge, no longer is applicable. We have to really expand the universe of opportunities that we are looking at with the intent of involving the private sector, but again, keeping in mind that it's no longer going to be the old models.
Great. So you mentioned transportation. Talk a little bit about the vision of transportation in a smart city.
So congestion problems are now everywhere, and this is mostly driven by an increasing urbanization. So if you look at the number of people who live in cities, currently we're at about 50% of world population living in cities, and this figure is going only to increase in the future. So we're looking at about 65% by 2050 of people living in cities. In OECD countries, and the OECD is a club of rich countries, people over the age of 65 are on average, 85% of them are going to be living in cities. So you have a tremendous problem, one, of urbanization, more people living in a more confined space, and two, older people living in that confined space, which actually now creates a need for providing mobility to folks who actually cannot move themselves to go from one point to the other. The answer is not let's build more roads, because often there's no space to do that. The answer is how can our infrastructure meet the needs of the future by best leveraging technology? So, question number one, do we need to build as many roads? Question number two, have we looked at the best urban transit systems that are available? Question number three, are you putting in place the best traffic management methods that you have? In the past, the way to predict the amount of traffic on a road was to build these statistical models that allow you to estimate at a point in time the number of cars that will be on the road. We don't need to do this anymore. With sensors, with remote traffic management, we can in real time manage traffic. So these are the changes that have to happen, because otherwise the outcome is going to be many, many more hours spent in the car to get from one point to another.
Do you see how do you see autonomous vehicles coming online and helping with the issues?
Right. So if you believe the forecasts, we are looking, and not that far into the future, we're looking at the year 2030. About 35% of all miles traveled will be traveled in autonomous driverless vehicles. So this creates two questions. And the first question we already asked, which is, do you need as much infrastructure? The second question is, who will operate those automated vehicles? And how about what engineers call the roadside furniture? So basically the sensors that are able to communicate with the vehicles to guide them from one point to another. So two interesting problems here. One, on the side of the vehicles, who owns them, who operates them? And then question number two, the roadside infrastructure that communicates with these vehicles and ensures that they are being driven safely, who operates those as well? So again, we fall into a number of schemes. some of which actually include some sort of public-private partnership. Why wouldn't a private sector operator own the roadside infrastructure and receive some sort of payment from all of the users who will be on the road? So there are some interesting schemes that will have to be considered in the future. But it is coming. There is no way that it's going to happen. It's just how well are we ready to respond to that change when it happens.
Okay, that's excellent. So you mentioned roadside furniture and the infrastructure. What are the technologies beyond the sensors that you think are going to be essential to building that infrastructure?
Yeah. So the word sensor is often used, but really the objective of the sensor is to transmit data, information from a user to some. It's not the sensor that's actually where you want the data to come from. You want the data to be coming from some sort of operating center that allows you then to communicate with the vehicle and allow the vehicle to communicate back with the center or also with other vehicles as things will improve. Sensors have become exceptionally cheap over the last few years. So the ability to place sensors and to collect information through these sensors at this point in time is at a far more advanced level than it's ever been in the past. But then we fall into other issues. Can these sensors be hacked? Who can access the data? Who owns the data? So when I'm actually sending my information to either a private sector provider or to some sort of government operator, is it the government's data? Is it the private provider? So if you use Google Map and you send information about your own whereabouts to Google, does Google own your data or do you own your data? And that poses yet another question, which is who actually pays for this? And the one thing that I hear coming back to sensors, because the idea is you're basically transferring data from one point to another. The question that I often hear is how do we monetize the data? And I think the answer that you often get is we will monetize it through advertising, and which to me doesn't make sense. What needs to happen is be able to find out how we can drive decision making through the data, and that I think will be where the value of that data resides.
Internet of Things and 5G and all these network technologies, how do you see all that impacting this new world, or the smart world we're building?
So Internet of Things, and I won't quote the statistics because I think everyone's heard them, but the number of connected devices is tremendous. And actually, we're just scratching the surface, because if you add the industrial internet, so the number of sensors that would be placed on things like airplane engines and manufacturing facilities, all of that data will be flowing, and it will describe many things, some of which will be how your car engine operates, to where you are currently located, to basic appliances in your house. So how that gets monetized and captured, I think, is the big issue. But we go back to this idea of why would we do it unless there's some value for it? So it's not the technology that's the challenge, because the technology can allow you to do all of that. There is technology now that allows you to connect billions and billions of devices. I think the intrinsic question is, why would you do so? And what is the value that you get out of it? Because if the idea is just to collect the data, then it's fairly useless. It's how do you drive it afterwards? How do you improve safety? How do you optimize operations? How do you make money off of it? So there are a number of questions. So I often find that we fall back into what's the technology going to do? I think the right question is, what are we going to do with the technology?
That's good. That's good. Okay. So just in summary, any key areas or any key statements that you'd like to make regarding smart cities and the growth?
So I think the one thing that, so I'll make, I'll comment in two areas. One, what I believe will help us move forward on some of those initiatives. And the second is, where do we see some promise and what are the initiatives that look to be the most promising? So on the first, speaking of what should be done to accelerate this transformation, I think if you look at many cities, they are still experimenting with the best model for securing financing, for rolling out projects. Again, there's a bit of an opportunity cost. So which project do you pick first? Which project do you pick later? So everyone is struggling with that. And I think what we need to do, we and the Smart Cities Council and everyone who's interested in advancing smart cities, is codify a bit the best practices. And those best practices would be, the best technology that's been used for an application, but also the best financing mechanisms, the best contractual language that allow these projects to roll out. And I think we're lacking here. I think if you were to look for a place that has a codified best practice, the same way, for instance, looking back 20 years ago or 30 years ago, when infrastructure public-private partnerships were being launched, the contracts, the legal documentation, the performance measures, all of that were codified by many governments, and you could actually access their database and see what worked, what did not work. I think we're lacking that in the smart cities environment. So this is on the one hand, right, how can we move this forward? The second thing is, where do I think we need to move it forward? And I think this is where trying to identify the best way to capture data from multiple sensors, or iPhones or any sort of data collection device, trying to consolidate that data in one place and then use that data to drive decision making on the things that are the most high priority is where we need to be going. Because if I look at the smart cities initiatives that are being rolled out currently, most of them are opportunistic. So someone comes up with a bright idea, puts the cash, goes and says, let's do something, and they might be able to pull it off and actually implement. I think we need to kind of reverse it and say, let's take a look at what we have, what we're collecting, what we need, and drive our decision making off of that, instead of just being reactive and opportunistic.
Excellent. Great.
All right.
Thank you very much. Say your name and title.
I'm John Wilson from Hitachi Vantara. I run business development for telco and IoT solution sales for the Americas.
Great. So smart cities utilize IoT and other network technologies. Can you talk about what the main drivers are and how it's impacting cities?
So I focus on our overall IoT and telco focused applications. So smart cities is one of the very first, verticals. We have a very large presence in most of the largest cities in the U.S. And we've got our public safety infrastructure deployed in Dallas and Chicago and Atlanta and DC here in DC, and it really is a fundamental entry point into smart city. So you have to, safe city is the biggest driver in how we approach an entrance into becoming a smart city. So the technology to help with video analytics and use cases to lower crime statistics, by providing facial recognition software or traffic and analytics software, flow, parking, public-private partnerships to allow you to offer services or extend the field of view of the police department into mom and pop grocery stores or big box grocery stores that are there that would like, when they have a shoplifting event, they would like the police to have access to those camera systems so that when they're calling them, they already have them in their systems. They can put them into their evidence management. They can use that to help investigate a shoplifting allegation.
So is real-time networking crucial to providing your solutions?
Real-time networking is absolutely crucial. So the evolution now of 4G technology into into what will become 5G and the densification of Wi-Fi, the densification, small cell densification that all the carriers are in the midst of, the evolution of the MSOs and the cable operators into wireless carriers. If you look at the last spectrum bid, people were very, very surprised that AT&T and Verizon and Sprint and T-Mobile all abstained, and all that spectrum went to Comcast and Charter and Cablevision and the MSOs who are, because 5G is not just, people think of 4G and 5G, it's just the next evolution. My phone's going to be a little faster. The 5G is going to provide 40 to 50 times the performance and the throughput that 4G did. And the evolution that networks are taking now is huge. A lot of these cities today, where we've been deploying smart city and safe city applications, have had to build these massive fiber networks, dedicated networks, or their own private unlicensed spectrum LTE networks to connect all of their devices together. It's been very, very expensive, and the cost point for smart city and safe city deployments is going to drop dramatically as the need for it is increasing exponentially. So 5G is really going to be an enabling point for us to provide massively more robust smart city, safe city platforms. And
so what type of bandwidth does one camera utilize in a given day in Times Square?
It really depends. It's hard to say. So it depends on the resolution of the camera. It depends on the frame rate. It depends on the amount of activity that you have. Who's going to be, how you have it set up. But it can, it can vary to, a couple hundred megs to, a couple hundred gigs. It's very, very, very variable. A lot of our customers will real-time stream a very low frame rate, through their encoder. So they have, if it's something in the real-time crime center that they're watching, that have the classic, screens up that they're watching, they still have a low resolution, low frame rate, real-time view. But our biggest use case for the high bandwidth is when there's actually an incident. So we've got workflow built into our platform that if a gunshot detector goes off, for example, it will take 5 minutes of every camera that's in range of that, whether they're dash cams or stationary cams or cameras on a public-private partnership that are on the front of a bank or a department store. It will store the footage of anything that's within range. It'll get data from social media of anyone who's tweeting about a gunshot, or it'll take all the 911 calls that came into their CAD system, package that all up, put it in an evidence folder, have it ready for the person who's going to start investigating it before they even get dispatched to those. That will then, if there's PTZ capable cameras, it'll auto-rotate cameras towards where the incident was. It'll interface with each of the license plate recognition devices that are on the cameras that have LPR capabilities. It's a very robust mechanism to provide a way for the investigating officer to have data on what led up to the event and then things that happen after it, so that you can very, very quickly react to an event.
So what are some of the more exciting IoT applications that you're working on now?
So smart cities is very, very exciting. It's very active. Our socioeconomic stuff that is there. But if you look at Hitachi, We are very, very unique in this market. We've just undergone a massive transformation internally and are in the process of a massive transformation across our entire company. Hitachi Vantara was born last week. It's a brand new company. We've taken the largest components of our IoT portfolio with Hitachi Data Systems and Pentaho, our analytics platform. We have a unique opportunity because Hitachi is made up of 900 plus group companies, and those 900 plus group companies are in every industrial vertical there is. We build cars, we build trains, we build MRIs, we build CAT scans, we build proton beam therapy, cancer treatment chambers, we build nuclear power plant control systems, we build components that go into vehicles for GM and Toyota, so we have 100+ years of operational technology experience building all the devices that create the data that you need to use for IoT applications. And then couple that with 55 or so years of IT experience with all of the systems that we use to store that data and analyze that data and a heavy analytics framework. So we've taken our and instead of a lot of our competitors in this space have built an IoT platform that they want to sell to their other customers. We built an IoT platform to provide a service to transform and modernize our entire portfolio of hundreds of operational industrial technology companies, which led to the Lumada platform so that we can use it to optimize our own operations and our own factories and our own our own IoT use cases, and now provide that as a platform to the rest of the world. So the more exciting ones are industrial. So we've always talked about. So I'll just back up a second. Hitachi's founding principles were on social innovation. Our very first products that were built 105 years ago were the electric motor in Japan. And our founding pioneering principles were to introduce technology into lives to make people's lives better. And we have done that consistently for the last 100 years. We now, all of the different technologies that we build. So today in IoT, we're delivering technology that is making people's lives better, making the planet a better place, and literally saving lives. Our proton beam therapy, cancer treatment chambers, and our CAT scans and our MRIs and the things that we do in the medical space are super exciting. Our rail systems with Hitachi Rail are some of the most innovative in the world.
Let me dig into that one a little bit. Talk about what specific applications you're doing to help with rail.
So so rail right now we have a partnership with. So not just a partnership. We have actually taken over UK Rail in the United Kingdom. So not just building the rolling stock. So we're building the trains, we're building the locomotives, we're building the infrastructure to expand the rail systems. We're providing UK Rail as a service to the United Kingdom, from delivering trains on time, to getting trains in and out of the stations on time, to preventive maintenance to keep the trains operating optimally, to making sure that the app that are on people's phones, we have SLAs for the response time on how quickly you can bring up your boarding pass on your phone, how quickly we can get people through lines and kiosks, how quickly we can load and unload the trains. We're operating that as a complete service to the United Kingdom, and we're expanding that into other cities now in the U.S. We've moved large-scale operations for Hitachi Rail to Miami-Dade. We're building new trains for the for all of the new trains for the city of Miami, and retrofitting the existing fleet of trains with our IoT control systems platforms. So very exciting in the rail business.
Good. All right, that's a good one. Yeah, I needed. Okay, if you would just say your name and
Sure.
your company.
Sure. Greg Rowland. I'm sorry, looking at you or looking at the camera? Okay. Greg Rowland. I'm with Hitachi Vantara.
Great. So, Greg, can you expand on what Hitachi focuses on in the smart city and what the kind of main sectors are?
Sure. So, I mean, smart city is a very broad term. So we look at transportation, we look at the fundamental infrastructure of the city itself, we look at public safety. One of the things we say is you can't have a smart city unless you start with a safe city. So we look at bus and rail, light rail, wastewater management, water flow control systems. Just there's a lot of things inside smart city. It's actually a catch-all these days. What we really focus in on is trying to have an end-to-end solution so that we can take all these different silos that are out there in a smart city and help them start connecting together and taking advantage of the money they've spent. These different organizations spend tons of money, but they duplicate a lot of things. And in order to take advantage of some of the technologies they've purchased, they really need to partner up inside their own organizations so that they don't have to go out and spend more money on technology or infrastructure. So as John talked about before, some of the workflow management, command control, single pane of glass applications that we have actually allow different departments to share resources. We have many cities that the police will share resources with the transportation people. They'll take the cameras off of the light poles and they'll use that for public safety when it's needed, and then when it's not needed, it'll be for traffic control and monitoring, those types of things. Why go out and have 5 different cameras on the pole when you can share that infrastructure? And we help them do that through some of our applications. And then analytics to make the system smarter. The idea is you buy a lot of technology, but how much does it cost on the life cycle to run that technology? How many people do you have to have sitting in a room pushing buttons? Or how many people do you have to be around making decisions constantly? We try to remove that. We can't remove it 100%. We try to make it simpler by using analytics to alarm things, workflow management to tell people what needs to be happening, business intelligence so that things can be a little bit more automatic in the process, and then share all that information that's coming into the city from all these different repositories so that decisions can be made more efficiently and more quickly.
What role does the network play in making these solutions?
Well, if you can't get the data back, it's pretty useless. So there's a couple of things we've done in our partnerships with the telcos. We've looked at where are they now and then where are they going to be later. And so we've designed a lot of technology that deals with the here and now with the thought going forward of our product plan being the growth of their networks and what we can do when we get to these faster speeds. So a lot of our cameras have memory in them and compute power and things like that so that we can actually run a camera on a 4G network. Not too many cameras will run on a 4G network because they require full 30 frames per second type of information coming back. So we can store video on the camera instead of all the time shipping it back. And then when it's needed, either by an alarm or something happening or an auto accident or whatever it is, triggers that camera and then that camera can start downloading information. So they're not sitting there paying for a lot of data transmission unless they need it. So it's more of an on-demand approach versus a full-time send all this stuff down whether we need it or not. Same way with storage. There's a lot of retention rates and policies that go out there. The cities are struggling with how long do we keep this information around? How long is it needed for legal purposes? How long is it needed for study purposes, analytics purposes, things like that? We help them make good decisions on what data to keep, what data to get rid of, how do they parse that, and more economical solutions around storing that data.
Can you describe what goes into building an effective public safety system for a city?
Well, the first one is, again, back to that same interoperability discussion we had before. The first one is making sure that everybody can speak to each other. And when I say speak to each other, they can share the data that's sitting somewhere in the system that would be useful to them. Like we talked about before, investigators right now, when they get a case, they have to run around the building and ask 12 people for information. Where we create a digital repository so that they can get that information, anything they need on any case they want, securely, following all the laws or regulations on chain of custody and all those things, just by going into their laptop or their PDA or their phone. So we help them save time. The idea is information sharing makes a safer public, because then they can react. The other thing is public-private partnerships. We spend a lot of time helping, just like in the city of DC here, a lot of the cameras that Metropolitan Police Department uses for their work are not necessarily owned by the city. They're owned by businesses, federal agencies, and other entities. We've helped them bring all that video back into one place, so when they need it, they can have access to it. They don't have to maintain it. They don't have it on their budget. But there's a lot of businesses that want to be good citizens and share that technology as part of that public-private partnership. And we've written the software, developed the edge gateways, and the other things that allow them to do that in a very economical way.
You mentioned edge gateways. What do you see as do you see the edge becoming more and more important to the processing of all this data and controlling it?
Well, until the networks can, I don't want to say catch up, because the networks are doing a great job and 5G is right around the corner. But until you just have unlimited bandwidth, it makes more sense to do a lot of things at the edge. Sometimes it's much cheaper, not only just from a network standpoint, but just from a compute and storage standpoint, to do it at the edge and ask for it when you need it, versus just having all this data coming at you. What do I do with all the data? How do I compile it? How do I make sense of it? Versus doing things at the edge and creating alarms and things like that that will help people get the information they need when they need it. So we're really preparing ourselves to do both. Good storage, compute power, essentially, when the customer wants it, but really put an emphasis on efficiencies at the edge.
That's good. I'm going to shift a little bit to transportation. Autonomous vehicles are coming.
Uh-oh.
How does Hitachi see that fitting into the smart city environment from a technological standpoint?
Well, it's interesting, because Hitachi designs the electronics for the top 7 automobile manufacturers in the world, and a lot of the cameras and networking and firmware that goes in a car now is made by Hitachi. So I think our idea is we're working with the automobile manufacturers to take advantage of the technologies in the systems, as well as new technologies coming down. We're big time in the radar and LiDAR and video, as you know. And so we see that as a core component of the business that we're already in on our automotive side. But then it's the interoperability, again, from the vehicles, vehicle-to-vehicle communication is very important. That's why we're partnering with the telcos, because we think they're going to play a major role in that. The IEEE standards, we're working around those to make sure that anything we do follows the standards that are being developed around the cars. And from a public safety standpoint, we just see all kinds of advantages from a public safety standpoint on connected vehicles once they're tried and true.
Yeah. Okay, any specific areas that you'd like to expand on, and just talk, off your head, that you think are key to building the smart city?
I just come back to disconnected entities within cities that need to start working together from a data sharing perspective. I think that's the number one problem we've had in law enforcement. It's the number one problem we've had in cities that just spend all this money trying to get stuff done. So Hitachi is all about helping bring all this stuff together and making it work. We're working with one city on trash can sensors so that they don't have to roll their trucks as often because they know how much trash is in the trash can. We're working with other cities on safety protocols around trains and people crossing the tracks, leaving things inside train stations that make them unsafe because they don't have enough people to patrol. The problem with public safety is we're not getting more cops. There's actually less law enforcement we have to work with because of declining budgets. So we got to help cities really create a safer environment through technology and through information sharing. And then once you have that safe city, then you can start automating processes and making the customer experience. And the customer experience could be a lot of things, from paying your gas bill or your water bill all the way through getting to a train on time, or finding out when a bus is running, or being able to hit a panic button if you're in trouble somewhere in the street. It's all about making people's lives better. So, yeah, that's right. Yeah. Okay. So on the transportation side, we were talking about that before. One of the things we're doing with customers like Minnesota Light Rail is to help them in terms of making their stations safer and making their trains safer. So putting video on the trains to look at how many people are on the train, what's happening on the train, get the situational awareness around the train, but also adding video to the stations themselves so that we know how many people are waiting for a train, what's happening in terms of the station, the safety of the people inside the station, and then we're layering on analytics to that to help them run a more efficient transportation system. Deal with the ebb and flow of people showing up to get on trains, how many trains do they need to be running, how much longer they need to be, those types of things on board as well as from a station standpoint. Yep.
All right, well, I appreciate it.
You're identifying match resources. You're articulating problems and challenges. What I liked about the Columbus proposal, absolutely, we talked about it before, so I'm not going to go into it too much, but driving down that infant mortality rate number and articulating it that way in a manner that says we're going to use these technologies and these process reforms, and we're going to do it with these partners to save babies, that sounds like a pretty good ROI to me. My personal passion with your proposal was, taking a step back, looking at transportation innovation. I do a more holistic kind of national picture approach, and that is, you had a lot of activity going on in places like Ann Arbor, Michigan, a lot of great activity happening in places like Pittsburgh with Carnegie Mellon, and this notion that these things need to be interoperable, but they also need to be interstate in nature at some point. So the ideas surrounding electric vehicle, autonomous applications, knowing that you could start to piece together multiple states was very attractive to me. And so that's where, I sort of threw the dart at Columbus, and I said, this is really intriguing. They've articulated some good stuff, and there's this other benefit that we can get out of it here. The last point I'll make too is this award, the ideas behind it, they had to be transposable. Meaning there were 77 other cities. There are more cities outside of that scope. What ideas can we take from this investment and transpose it over other cities to address the same type of challenge?
So Ben, I want to turn to you, because you worked with Vulcan and a parallel process, and worked with the semifinalists or the finalists, and I'm curious, sort of, what this looked like from that lens, in the sense of you had a different purpose, an aligned purpose, but a different purpose. And maybe you could talk about that.
Sure. And maybe, as a starting point, I think that what the DOT did at that time, in conjunction with a philanthropic partner like Vulcan, is sort of unmatched and unseen. And so there was this sort of idea that they were breaking the mold around how do you solve problems in cities. So, in many ways, this is this concept of this reverse pitch, where you say, here's some money, now you say what your problems are and then how you could use the resources to solve those problems. And I think it really changed the dynamic in cities, because instead of trying to write a proposal that matches an RFP, right, or whatever, request for proposals moment, it changed that sort of thinking process, and it allowed cities to sort of get together their cohorts and say, okay, what are our problems? And specifically within the transportation sector, and then how can we use these resources as a catalyst to solve those problems? And so when we read these applications, and I was one of the fortunate folks outside the DOT that had the opportunity to see all 78, and sometimes I wasn't glad that I had that opportunity, but it was amazing to see the thought and the energy and all these solutions that cities were offering. So on the Vulcan side, this was the recognition that transportation had become, at that time it was the second largest emitter of GHG, and now it's the largest. And so if you're thinking about transportation and this idea that it can help solve huge problems in the world, or there are opportunities to solve huge problems, it made a lot of sense to focus on transportation. But Vulcan was coming at it from a connected but different perspective than the DOT. And so it was really, for us, we went and we visited all the cities with Vulcan. We had the opportunity to sit down with the partners. We had the opportunity, especially for the finalists, we didn't go to all 78 cities, I should clarify. We went to the 7 cities and sit down with the finalists and their teams. And so with Columbus, one of the things that I think really stood out, and part of the reason that for the Vulcan portion, they jumped into the lead in a lot of ways, was this private sector engagement that was unmatched in the other cities. And so they have this, and that's who Jordan comes from, but it's the Columbus Partnership. And it is 65 of the area businesses that have come together as civic leaders from the business community that are solving problems in that, in Columbus. And the idea that then they could connect to their 300,000 employee group and this, electrify the transportation sector for those communities and use those businesses as sort of integrators and market force, right? Really a great connection. It just stood out above the pack, and I think it also showed up in the resources those businesses brought to the table too. So this accelerator fund that they created, which now has sort of continued to multiply and multiply. And then I'll add one last piece, which is we're looking at the idea of EVs as a solution. So the Electrification Coalition focuses on it because it's 70% of the oil we consume is consumed by our transportation sector, and EVs represent one of the best scalable alternatives. And then you connect AVs, and if AVs are EVs, we're really on to something. And so I think Columbus represented this sort of heartland, this place not usual suspect, sort of a hidden gem, actually. So if you get on a plane and go to Columbus, I think you'll find that it is not the city you think it is. It is much more. I was surprised by that as well. But in this case, it's this opportunity to create a demonstration that more cities are going to connect with. So most cities don't see themselves as a San Francisco or an Austin. And not that there's anything wrong with San Francisco or Austin, they're great places, but that's not how a city thinks they can operate. They do think they're much more like a Columbus. And so as Columbus writes the playbook, demonstrates the impact of the programs that they're creating, and we're actually on the ground with them hand in hand. We're very lucky to be a part of now also the team that's helping implement. I think that those things are going to have a huge multiplier impact for cities around the country, and I think that was a big part of where, when we were making those tough choices and making our recommendations, that ultimately the secretary was the decider, that Columbus really stood out as this opportunity that we couldn't take, we had to take.
So Dominique, I want to turn to you next. I'm going to ask you to play a role that we didn't talk about, so I hope this is okay. We don't actually have anyone here from private industry.
Okay.
And it is, I think Ben's point is exactly spot on.
Can I ask you to say your name and your company?
Hi, I'm Kathleen Griggs. I'm CEO of Data Buoy Corporation. We're based in McLean, Virginia.
Can you explain a little bit about the technology in ShotPoint?
ShotPoint is an acoustic shooter localization system. It's a fundamental sensor-based system. ShotPoint is based on 4 acoustic microphones, it's a 4-microphone array acoustic sensor. Each sensor can individually locate on the source of gunfire. We are a network system, so we require more than one sensor to report on the location of the shooter, and we have an intelligent fusion processor that listens for multiple sensor reports and determines whether or not that is a gunshot. Using multiple sensors, we eliminate false detections and bad answers caused by multipath and reverberations.
What type of networks do you use to operate this?
So we are a sensor net, and we do require either some type of Ethernet, or we have our own built-in radio if we don't have access to Ethernet. But we do require deterministic timing. So we have some special requirements in terms of the network that that would support our sensors. But we are fairly agnostic, and we can work with existing systems.
Does 5G factor into utilization down the road?
I see honestly, I am not a network, a wireless networking company, but we see 5G as a complement to our system, and the wireless and the 5G world, they have a lot of supporting functions that does make it easier for our sensor network to operate. So it does solve it. It means that we don't have to bring our own radio.
And what are the police saying about the effectiveness of having shot points?
So I think police departments are very interested in the system because it definitely takes the burden off of trying to understand what is happening in a catastrophic situation. Catastrophic situations tend to snowball in confusing reports and calls into 911, and they have to sort through that information to determine what's really happening. We provide an actual report on the location of the shooter. We can get you imagery of that shooter in 1 second, and that cuts through all of the chaos, gets them all the same information in seconds, and that enables them to begin the response right away.
So when you say you can get the image, what do you mean by that?
So we've integrated with video management systems, and what we do there is when we localize the source of the shooter, we can actually cue a nearby camera to give us an image of the shooter, and we can grab a few seconds of video off of that, and that actually provides a lot more identification information, so that not only do we have the location of the suspect, we can get an image of that suspect and identify them right away.
That's two stuff I just wanted to get.
Okay, sorry, I'm getting to the outdoor environment in the commercial space, so that's.
So yeah, it's a combination. You want to make sure we have insurance, you're properly covered, all of this stuff, but then also we want to make sure that we have a simple framework to work on as well.
So if you say your name and organization, please.
Sure. I am Vatsal Bhatt from U.S. Green Building Council.
Okay, and I'm going to actually sit over this way.
Sure.
And have you look here.
Okay, looks good.
Okay, so tell me what the U.S. Green Building Council does.
So U.S. Green Building Council develops a rating system and then certifies based on those rating systems. And these rating systems range from buildings to communities to cities. And our sister organization called Green Business Certification, Inc., where Sarah leads the discussion, is about certification and credentialing. So there is a lot of that work going on. And that institution has a few other rating systems as well, which focus on wellness, energy, meaning power systems, and then parking systems, landscapes, waste, and other aspects of it. And credentialing is also done for LEED accredited professionals. At the same time, recently we have a couple other new credentialing offerings as well, and one is done for climate professionals and professionals who would want to get some certification and expertise on getting greenhouse gas emissions inventory and all, and that was recently being announced.
So what are when you certify a smart city, what are the key,
Sure.
aspects you focus on?
Sure. So we have in December 2016 launched a new certification called LEED for Cities, and that certification is looking into broader aspects of sustainability, quality of life, technology, and services.
So what are the rankings?
So here we are talking about mostly performance and where cities perform at what level. So it's hardcore data-driven discussion. And you asked me about smart cities, but even in cities right now, they are inviting chief technology officer, chief data officer, chief information officer. And many a times their initial discussion is to really try to find out how can we bring a lot of data on one platform so that then we can use this data to analyze, to find out some interesting trends in which the city is going, and how we can use that analysis to plan the city better, manage the city better. So that is where our discussion is, to talk about all these services, all this different infrastructure, all these different aspects of our urban development, right? Urban progress. So we are hardcore talking about performance, at what level a city is performing. So if I may give you an example, one of our 14 parameters for certifications is greenhouse gas emissions. And so for an example, say Washington, D.C., where we are right now, is the first city that got certified very recently, almost a month ago. And their greenhouse gas emissions are, say, roughly 12 tons per capita per year. And that is interesting because compared to other cities across the nation, their emissions are comparatively quite low. So we are hardcore talking about performance and data, where we can certify cities based on their peers. We are not talking about an idealized world in which a city is net positive on emissions, because to be in a real world, that discussion is still much farther. Cities are dealing with their existing infrastructure, sunk capital, and all those things. So for them to go from there to net positive is going to take time. But still, right now, that is our ambition. So we drive market transformation on sustainability. And so that is our ambition, that cities go that way. But here we are being more practical. When we are talking to cities, cities have their existing momentum. And we want to compare them with their peer rather than comparing them with an idealized world, a utopia. And that is where here we are talking about giving a certification to a city based on their actual performance. And that's where I just gave you a metric about energy, which is greenhouse gas emissions. For water, we are talking about how much water do they consume per person per year or daily, whatever we call it. For transportation, we are talking about how much of vehicle miles are traveled by people on individual vehicles. And that's a big part of it. Or solid waste. Or for that matter, quality of life discussion, in which we are talking about education, health, public safety, equitability, prosperity. And we are saying that each city is different, their priorities are different, their challenges are different, their policies are different, and their approaches to deal with those challenges are different as well. So we are saying, you know, cities, we are talking to you about certifying on certain aspects, but we understand that your priorities are different. So we would want to request you to work on your priorities separately. And if you want to track data, if you want to track your performance over 200 different parameters, let's give you that opportunity to use this particular certification and the platform that we are offering called ARC for their measuring performance over time.
How do you gather the data?
So we have, being researchers, we have gathered the data from publicly available sources, but we are using that just as a reference. We are working with cities and saying, cities, you give us the data, because here we are asking cities to get certified. So we are requesting cities to give their data. They have this data. They have this data in many disparate locations, disparate offices have it. So we are requesting them to bring all these discussions on one platform. We are requesting them to use that platform to bring all this data on one platform, bring all their different department directors on that platform and say, let's talk about cutting across silos. Let's try to centralize this discussion so that if one department wants X information from the other department, they don't need to go through a process to get that data, but that data is available up here. Just go get it, because you have an access to that platform, because you are one of the directors of one of the departments in a city. So here we are talking about cities generating their own data in their own ways and utilizing it for certifications. For example, right now, cities collect data in many different ways, but in smart cities discussion, we believe that cities will be collecting dynamic data. Through various sensors, data would be coming in very dynamically. So that is where it would be very interesting for cities to use such kind of platforms in future and say, how can they really make dynamic decisions based on dynamic data coming in? And that would be very useful for them to be compared to their peers, world cities, with that dynamic data coming in the real time, and see how cities are performing over time.
We edit. Okay, if you say your name and your role.
Sure. Whenever. Okay, great. Hi, I'm Jennifer Sanders. I'm the Executive Director of the Dallas Innovation Alliance.
Great. Okay, sounds good. I'm going to stand. I'm going to actually sit.
Do you want me to look at you or look in the camera?
Yeah, look this way.
Okay.
Right over my head.
Okay, great.
So explain the Dallas Innovation Alliance.
Sure. So the Dallas Innovation Alliance is a 501c3 public-private partnership whose mission is to design and execute a smart city strategy for the city of Dallas.
And what are the key areas that you're focusing on?
So at the inset, we pulled together an initial 15 partner organizations across civic, public, nonprofit, private sector, and academic, and got everyone in a room and identified 3 core pillars for our first phase, and that is smart infrastructure, smart mobility, and connected living.
Excellent. So can you expand a little bit on each of those silos, or each of those branches?
No, absolutely. So all of our projects for our initial phase, which we're calling the Living Lab, that some cities are undertaking. So we identified a 4-block corridor in a downtown area and are putting 8 different projects into this Living Lab. And so from concept to execution, having them in the ground, we did that in less than a year. And so some of the projects that fall within those 3 pillars include smart street lighting, which is kind of the ground zero baseline for a lot of cities. We have environmental sensing to work with the Office of Environmental Quality as well as the Resiliency Office to look at public health impacts of air quality. We're doing pedestrian counting and flow in order to understand economic development and traffic patterns and pedestrian patterns. And we have a digital interactive kiosk that we're doing that's providing the wayfinding services and other mechanisms in public information. So when we look to kind of a second set that's more mobility focused in our first phase, we're really looking at parking primarily, as well as pedestrian flow from a mobility perspective. And so in addition to parking, we're looking at resource efficiencies infrastructurally around smart water meters and smart irrigation, and then public Wi-Fi, because if you ask anybody what a smart city is, that's one of the things they're going to say. So we're going to test a different type of design for that Wi-Fi network.
Okay, so you mentioned Wi-Fi. Well, what is the role of networks in enabling all of what you're putting together?
So I mean, the 2 fundamentals for building a smart city are the network and the data piece, correct? And so when we look at network infrastructure, you know, because we're kind of a quasi-public entity, we work closely with the city, but we're not a city entity. We're not building the full private networks that they're looking to build, and that's where, but helping them explore and understand what other cities are doing around the network. And so one of the things that we're seeing, you know, cities really working towards the kind of multi-use case network build. So if you can host, you know, 4 different systems on the same private network, it's much better than 4 departments obviously trying to build their own network. So if we can have one network running the water meters and the traffic signals and the police cameras and what have you, that's a bigger bang for the buck. So when we think about any of these projects in smart cities, it's really about how much can you accomplish cross department with a single investment. And I think that's one of the factors that's allowing departments to work together that maybe previously were working in silos.
So you mentioned private network. What's the vision there? Is it a city-owned network?
That's city, and actually I probably won't expound on that because I'm not within the city and I can't speak intelligently enough to the specifics on the private networks.
Okay. How did you pull together sort of is it a PPP effort? Would you call it? What's the role of PPPs in driving the smart city Dallas?
Well, I think it's been critical for the Dallas Innovation Alliance. And so what our thinking in developing a freestanding organization as opposed to, say, an internal innovation role within the city at the inset was just that we could bring all the sectors together and take a best minds approach that could move really quickly and be very nimble and agile, and then share those lessons learned with the city as they build kind of their internal structure laterally around smart cities, which they're in the midst of doing. So the private sector is a critical partner in that we take best practices from projects that have been executed around the world and make sure that they're customized to the use cases and the problems that Dallas wants to solve right now.
So does the mayor get directly involved? Is there, how do you drive interest? Or do people intrinsically know this is good for the city?
Absolutely. So it started with the entire concept started with a conversation with the mayor. So the mayor is very supportive in knowing that Dallas should really get on board with smart cities and take a big step forward and try and be ahead of when we're still in the nice to have, not the need to have phase of smart cities, and from an aging infrastructure standpoint and population influx and all of those things that we know. So having that champion, having the city manager's office and all of the kind of the deputies as our key points of contact have allowed that level of execution and that championing within the city. And then from the civic side and the public side, we do a lot of events. We have committees. We look for active engagement at the citizen level. And so that really builds awareness and allows for us to make sure that we're giving people what they want, obviously.
Feel free to just expand on some of the key issues or kind of takeaways that you'd like to just bring to the conversation.
Well, I think one of the things that Dallas has learned and that we've learned throughout the process is I'll back up. So, at this point, not only do we have almost 30 partner organizations within the DIA across those sectors, but we're currently working with over 20 departments within the city specifically. And so really starting, I would just say that the most important thing to do, which may seem intuitive, but isn't a step that's always taken, is an asset map across what is each department doing. Because what we found is smart cities is still so new and amorphous, particularly within a city, that most departments in the first conversation said, we're not doing anything like that. And then they'd start talking and I'd say, you realize that all of these fall within this umbrella. And when we link them, we can understand better what the overall strategy looks like and the baseline that we're starting from, so we can understand the gaps that we can help fill in the projects the DIA does. So really seeing that constellation, and that includes academic research institutions, because there's so much R&D happening on the academic side too. So how can we make sure that everyone is aware and working together where it's appropriate? For example, the University of Texas at Arlington just completed a really great profile and very expansive research on mobility equity for the resiliency officer with the city of Dallas. And so we just want to make sure that to the extent that's possible, everybody knows what the right hand knows what the left is doing within the city, but also all of these entities across the region doing great work understand.
So in Atlanta, the city and Georgia Tech actually hired a person to be the smart cities person.
She is great.
Is that when you start to see the universities are waking up to their and trying to help you? I mean, how does that come together? Yeah.
Oh, I think absolutely. But I think I think there are similar, I don't even want to say issues, but universities also are massive institutions that operate, by department, by school. And so another thing that we have found is that there's a lot of obviously very customized technical research going on within the same school. So if you look at the engineering schools, the business schools, computer science, architecture, and design, all of them are doing work that's about creating better, more livable communities in whatever capacity that looks like. And a lot of their research could be much more collaborative than it currently is. But everybody is under-resourced and plunging ahead, right? And so the whole idea is that smart cities initially, I think, came together as a rebrand of technologies that already existed, in the sense of, you look at network infrastructure, you look at the advent of Internet of Things and big data and analytics, and smart cities is really in the application of those existing and emerging technologies to the public sector and the public good. And so I think also for academic institutions to take a new look at how do their degree programs fit and also work in an integrated fashion for these careers of the future, for looking holistically at how do we improve an entire city. I think that's also critical, but it just takes a slight mind shift and perception shift on the skills that are already being utilized and just applying them in different ways.
Good.
Does that work?
Yeah.
Cool.
It's interesting because